Welcome to the tutorial for the Isfield dress. We're going to start with the darts, but I'm going to show you around the front dress pattern first because there's a couple of things we need to look at. You will need to join your pattern together with the triangles. This is if you've bought the paper version, you'll see it's got join here, join here. So you've got a bottom section and then you've got the top section, so they should fit together perfectly. You've got a lengthen and shorten line if you need it. You've got darts, you've got waistline, you've got a bust dart as well, and notches that you need to mark. So this bust dart I've marked how I normally do, with a pin at the apex and some little snips into the edge. This one I've marked it with some pins just at the tips of the sort of triangular bits, the top, bottom and the middle sides. But I'm also going to show you, I've got some of this tracing paper, dressmaker's tracing paper, and I thought this would be an alternative way to mark them if you'd like to, if you've got some and a tracing wheel. I've chosen blue because all I had was white, yellow and blue to choose from, and I thought blue would be the most contrast, but I'm not sure how contrasty it will be. We'll see how much it shows up once I've done it. Anyway, so I'm just placing that tracing paper between my layers of fabric because it's on the fold. So the wrong side is on the inside. I've slid it in between those, and I'm now just tracing over the dart for the size that I'm making with my tracing wheel. So that was one side. I'm going to turn the carbon paper up the other way and slide it back in and do the same thing again. Make sure it's directly under your dart, and then pushing quite firmly, I'm tracing through that exact same dart. I normally colour in my dart sizes and things. I haven't done it this time, but it does make it a lot easier if you use a felt pen. Okay, so that's those traced. Let's have a look and see if it's worked well enough for you guys to see on the camera. I'm leaving that pin in for the bust dart, as that's how I usually mark those. Let's open it up and have a look. Oh yeah, I can see it there. I don't know if you can. It's quite faint, but it is visible. So there we go, outlined in a lovely green there for you to give you an idea of where it is. Okay, so I'm going to transfer the mark for the apex for the bust dart here. Just popping pins on the wrong side. I'll take that one out there. Okay, so let's open it up and we'll start pinning the waist dart, just marking the ends there. And I'm going to fold it in half. I'm just going to use that line that I've traced, the dots, and just try and pin through the dots on both sides, really. Try and get as close as I can. Try and get it even on both sides. Okay, there's another pin there. Move that one over a little bit. It's worth spending a little bit of time to try and get it as accurate as possible. Okay, I think that's good to go. So most people would start at the point there and work along, but I'm going to start in the middle and work outwards on this one. And let's put some pins in for the bust dart. Match those little notches that I've nicked into the seam allowance there. Put a pin in to hold it. And the one at the apex there. So I start at the broad end and taper off to the apex. Tapering off there. Some people like to make their stitch length a little bit smaller as they get to the end, to the point there. Starting at the middle of the waist one, working outwards and tapering off towards that last pin at the end. And starting at the middle again and working out. Tapering off at the point. Okay, so that's the darts done. You can see there, I'm going to press that down and these ones out to the sides. There we go, beautifully pressed. Darts done. Okay, next up are the gathers at the back. So this is the back dress pattern. You've got a notch here that you need to mark with the corresponding size, one in the armhole, one at the waist. There's a hip one as well if you want to use a pocket, if you want to insert one. There's a free pattern and a tutorial on my website. You've got the length and shorten line there as well. I've marked the centre back there, that's quite important too. Okay, let's open this out. Okay, so you can see notch, notch, notch. You've got two notches and one in the middle, which is the centre back. So I'm going to stitch gathering stitches between those two outer notches. Okay, so I've turned my stitch length up to 4.5 and I'm stitching along a centimetre from the raw edge between those two notches. And then I'm going to do the same again between those two notches, but between that original stitch line and the raw edge. So it's around 5 mils in. Okay. So that's my gathering. That's all in place. Now I need the yoke. Grab the pattern. Here we go. So Isfield yoke, cut 1 to fold. Again, you've got a notch that you need to mark on the bottom there and in the armhole part. Mark your centre back with a little snip again. And then you just put those together, centre backs together, put a pin in, then find the outer notches and match those. That will give you how much you need to gather and where. So notch to notch. Oh, 2 pins in at once, there we go. And the other notch, the other side. And then just match up by the armholes. Okay, so now I'm going to pull up my gathering threads. And I'm just going to transfer those gathers between those notches, being careful not to break my threads. There we go, that's about the right amount. So you want to gather it until those pieces of fabric are the same length. The gathered bit lies flat against the yoke. A couple of extra pins. I will even out those gathers as I sew. So back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance, you've got your right sides together, off you go. Stitch length back to your ordinary stitch length. And I'm just going to titivate those gathers as I go, just to even them out a little bit. Again, it's worth taking a little bit of time to do that. It does look better. So I'm stitching over that first line of gathering stitches that I did so that I don't have to remove them. They shouldn't show on the right side when I turn it through. And back tack to finish. Great, let's have a look at that then. That's how it looks on the wrong side. And that's how it looks on the right side. Nice little gather there. So I'm going to overlock the edge. You can zigzag it if you don't have an overlocker. And then I'm going to press this seam allowance up towards the yoke. There we go, nicely neat and nicely pressed. Now, because this isn't a bagged out yoke, I'm going to put a little top stitch just right on the edge there to hold the seam allowance to the yoke. Nice straight stitch all the way across. You could use contrasting threads, make it a nice feature. Okay, so I think you can see that quite well. Next job is to stitch the front to the yoke. So here's my back with the yoke on that I've just done. And this is the area I'm going to stitch. I say the shoulder seams, but they're not actually on the shoulder here. So we're going to call them the yoke seams. So this is my front, and I'm matching up the fronts to the yoke. Pop a pin in. There we go. And I will be using my centimetre seam allowance again and stitching across. There we go, nicely stitched. I'm going to overlock, you could zigzag, and I'm going to press this seam towards the yoke again. Okay, that looks good on the right side, that's the wrong side, and I'm going to do that little stitch right on the edge just to hold the seam allowance to the yoke again. Okay, there we go, job done. Next, we're going to prepare the facings. So we've got a front and a back facing. I would keep the pattern pieces with them just so you don't get confused. And I'm also just going to mark with a chalk cross on the back one. Because these seams are not on the shoulder, these seams match the front yoke seam. So it might be a little bit less clear than usual where your front and back are. So I've interfaced these pieces and I'm going to stitch across a centimetre seam allowance again. There we go. Then I'm going to press this open. So that's it constructed. And then to finish this edge off, I'm going to use my overlooker again. You could just turn it in or you could do a zigzag. Now we're going to attach the facing. I'm just going to open this out. This is my back. This is my front. Got my centre backs and centre fronts marked with a tiny snip there. Now, there's my back. So, first things first, pin to mark those shoulders, which are the yoke seams. So that's one there, and then this one too. So lay them on top of each other, match up where the seam is on both the facing and the dress. And then we can mark the centre front with a pin. And just pin round, making sure the facing is lying as flat as possible. Best to do it a section at a time. There we go. So I'm going to start at one of the seams, back tack, stitch all the way around and come back. So a centimetre seam allowance as always, back tack, off we go. So just trying to keep those raw edges together as you circumnavigate the neckline. There we go. So all sewn. Now I'm going to clip these extra bits and I'm going to snip into my neckline as it's quite a tight curve. I'm going to snip in every sort of 1.5 centimetres all the way around. I'm not going to grade it today as it's quite a fine fabric. This is a linen viscose mix that I'm using. It's a really lovely lightweight, but it's got really nice body and drape to it. Okay, so now I'm going to take the time to push this seam allowance up towards the facing, and I'm going to actually give it a press. Okay, so that has been pressed upwards, and now I'm going to stitch through my facing and my seam allowance that is behind the facing, just on the edge there. It's about 1 millimetre away from the seam line, just to hold that seam allowance to the facing, so then when you turn it through it has a really lovely crisp neckline. There we go, you can see how close that is. Let's turn it through and have a little look, give it a press. Okay, so let's turn this through and we're going to start pinning again, matching those seams. And I'm pinning all the way around towards that overlocked edge, just to hold the facing flat so that there's no puckers. And I'm going to stitch just this side of the overlocking stitch all the way around. So again, taking your time to go all the way around and not get any puckers. This just holds your facing down nicely so you don't have to worry about it ruckling up. Okay, again you could use a nice contrasting thread as well if you felt confident. So that is my neckline. Let me just show you without the fabric behind, it might be a bit better. There we go, lovely, nice bagged out neckline. Super simple job next is to construct the back ties. So you should have 2 of these cut. I'm just going to show you one. Okay, so to start with I'm going to press the seam allowance on the long edges down towards the wrong side. There we go. And then I'm going to fold right sides together down the long edge, and I'm going to fold that seam allowance over on top of the other one and stitch across. Okay, so you can see those seam allowances are lying on top of each other. Just trim it down a little bit, turn it through, and then you've got 2 nice edges to stitch together along the length. So I'm going to start there and stitch all the way down. Okay, that's stitched, just needs a press. There we go, one tie. Okay, so we've done our ties, and I'm just going to show you on the pattern. This was the waist, and this is where the tie is going to go on my sample. So I'm just going to show you how that equates on the dress. Here's the dress and the side seam, underarm. So it lines up there. So that's the actual notch. And then I'm going to line up the top of the tie with that little notch. It's worth remembering that the most flattering place to put your ties is where you are the narrowest. So that may not be your waist, but you can have a little experiment and play with where you might want to put those for you. So then I just want my other side seam. Making sure that tie is well out the way. You don't want to stitch it into your seam anywhere else other than where it's supposed to be. And just pin down the sides. And starting from under the arm, back tack and stitch with the right sides together, a centimetre seam allowance all the way to the hem. Here we go. I'm going to press this seam open. That's it, pressed open. My last little job is where that tie, the little raw edge is. I'm just going to lift that seam allowance up there, and I'm going to stitch the raw edge to that seam allowance just where my other zigzag or overlocking stitch is. Just neaten it off a little bit, and it just adds a little bit more strength. There we go. Job done. Next we're going to prepare the sleeve. So you've got a top sleeve and an under sleeve, and you need a pair of each. Incidentally, if you haven't got enough of the outer fabric, you can cut the undersleeve from a plain fabric. Make sure you've marked all your notches on your sleeve head because they are important. Let's unpin. So I've got halfway notches. I've got notches either end here that I'm going to put my gather threads in between. So 2 rows of gathering threads as we did before, and I'm going to just do them between these 2 notches. So my stitch length's up to 4.5. I'm stitching a centimetre away from the edge, and then I'm going to do a second row of stitching halfway between that one and the raw edge. Okay, so now I bring back my other sleeves. This is my undersleeve. Now then, I need to make sure I've got the right one. Okay, so that's a double notch, so that's my back. That's a single notch. That's a double notch. Okay, so I want this top one because I want right sides together. So double notch, lay that out flat, double notch, and I'm going to pin my half notches together. And then the ends, matching those raw edges, right sides together. And then I'm going to pull up my gathering threads. So I need this larger sleeve, the top sleeve, to be the same length as the under sleeve. So pulling these threads up, taking up the excess fabric between the pins. There we go, they're the same length. So I'm just put a few more pins in, and I will again adjust those pleats as I go to make sure the gather's all nice and even. I'm spacing it slightly different. I don't want too many gathers under my arm because they don't show, and you don't want a puffy underarm. You want it mainly around your bicep. So I'm tapering the amount of gathers off towards those notches with the majority in the middle. So back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance again. I'm going to be stitching over that gathering thread as best I can so it doesn't show when I turn the sleeve through. And I'm just going to adjust those gathers as I go. Okay, there we go. Stitch those 2 together. And I'm laying my undersleeve over the seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch that seam allowance to my undersleeve on the edge again. I'm not pressing at this point because I don't want to flatten my gathers. I want to keep them all nice and poofy. Obviously stitch length back to normal for this bit. And take your time to stitch that seam allowance to the sleeve. There we go, you can see that nice and clearly there. So next job is the underarm seam. So we're going to match these seams here that were at the cuff, pin in there first, and then stitch from the underarm, back tack, centimetre seam allowance all the way through to the other underarm. And I'm going to press this seam allowance open now. Fabulous. So all that's left is to pull it through such that you can match this underarm seam again. So this is wrong sides together now. Pin in that seam. And then these sleeves, they're different curves on the top of the sleeve, but they are the same length. So you just want to match the raw edges and working your way around that sleeve head. Match them together. Give them a little pin, and we're just going to do a stay stitch. So right near the edge of the fabric, within the seam allowance, just a slightly larger stitch just to hold them together. So when you come to insert the sleeve, it's much easier because it's like one piece of fabric. You haven't got to fiddle with three. Okay, so there we go. I've attached those together. So now that is one sleeve. Let's turn it through and have a look. Get the full puff. Next job is to pop the sleeves in. Okay, so let's look at these notches. Double notch denotes the back of the sleeve, single notch is the front. So that's that one. So that must be that one. Okay. So first job, match those underarm seams. Pop a pin in. Then just find your sleeve and your outer armhole, and there's a notch there. And there's one there. Okay, so let's pop a pin in there. That looks like the right one. So we'll pop a pin in there and then we'll work our way from the underarm around the sleeve. Okay, so matching the raw edges as you go. Try not to stretch either the sleeve or the armhole, and just pin as you go. There's very little ease in this sleeve, so it should be very easy to pin it round and get it smooth. Okay, and then going from the underarm on the back, pop some more pins in. Now there's a notch that matches your yoke, and it is only marked on your outer sleeve pattern. And the reason for that was I thought it would make it more obvious that that's the yoke one. It also will help you make sure you've got your sleeves in the right way round. Okay. So there we go. You can see there's hardly any ease in there at all. So now we're going to stitch from the underarm, back tack all the way around and back tack to finish. Centimetre seam allowance. Obviously these are right sides together. And away we go. So you can see I'm matching those raw edges as accurately as possible. Take as accurate a centimetre seam allowance as possible, and then your sleeve will go in like a dream. Just take it a little bit at a time, working from pin to pin. There we go. Okay, that's in. It's all nice and smooth. No puckers or pleats. So I'm going to overlock the edge now to neaten it. Oh, it looks so lovely when it's overlocked. Turn it through and have a look. Double check. Yeah, lovely smooth sleeve insertion there. Okay, so now we're on the last process, which is the hem. So let's get this job done. Okay, there's my hemline. You can see I've overlocked it already. I'm going to do the quick option of overlock, turn and hem. It will of course look much nicer if you do a double turn, but I'm doing the quick version today. There we go, stitched. I'm going to give that a press. There we go. Nice quick hem. So we've got a lovely neat facing with the yoke, a beautiful sleeve. We've got side ties, we've got waist darts, bust darts, and hopefully your dress looks just like this one. Enjoy.